Hello there and welcome wherever you may be. This week there's a lot of amazing material. I will revisit some of Gurdjieff's favourite statements about knowledge, and later on we'll hear from Evola about how the perception of time has changed since traditional times. Now last week a small thing happened to me in the streets, and over the days I realised the extreme significance of it. I was walking home and an elderly English lady called out to me from the side of the pavement. She wanted to be walked back to her nursing home. She had some pain in her leg, sciatica, and she took my arm and I walked her home and had a nice conversation. But a couple of days earlier I had begun praying for the world again, as Gurdjieff advises, praying for the world, then your family, and then yourself. And I used a very short form of the rosary, 1 Our Father, 5 Hail Marys, and then discharge the prayer with the Amen. That's all, it takes just a few minutes and I do it in the evening. Some months back I'd started doing it regularly, but I fell out of practice. And I started again just a couple of days ago, and I felt like the earth was responding to me, like I had started to care for the world again, and now the earth was saying, well, I feel your prayers, will you care for this woman as well? And what's so consequential about it is that ordinarily the earth doesn't respond to us at all, because the whole modern world and everything we do in it doesn't mean anything. It's not connected to reality. And from the point of view of the earth, she doesn't really understand what all our busyness and activity has to do with anything, because it's just, it's become mechanical, it's become imaginary. It has become separated from our soul, from our impulses in our own centres. Humanity is separated from the true earth and drifted off into a strange, cloudy dream. But the earth, being real herself, will respond to us if we are able to return to the reality. And last week I was talking about the Enneagram. If a process leaves the circle and enters the inner web, it means that the octave is broken. And then what does it do? It bounces from one side to the other, to the bottom, to the up, travelling madly from one side to another in the inner web. That is what modern society is. It is a group of people who have lost the octave. Science says it's over here, then science says it's over there, then the UN says it's over here, then somebody else says it's over there. It bounces from side to side with no coordination, no goal. And when you're broken from the circle, you descend to a lower energy, and from there you cannot see out. That is why the answer to this is to contact once again the higher world. Bring a new light into the process so that you can rejoin the circle, where you will once again be integrated and know what to do. I often notice that in the morning I have incredible insights and many images occur in my mind, which express Gurdjieff's ideas and my understanding of what I see in front of me. Sometimes I put them in a notebook, but it happens only in the morning, and I believe that the vibrations of my centres, being well rested from the night before, become quite sensitive. Before I read out this section from Gurdjieff, I'm particularly interested to understand how a seemingly intact country like Britain can be led to fall off the edge of a cliff. How is that possible? It's as if the mind of society has become replaced or confused or distorted, and it pulls the whole body of society that may be in reasonably good shape off the edge of a cliff. But I'm trying to understand it in a more metaphysical sense. During one conversation with G, I asked, why, if ancient knowledge has been preserved, is it so carefully concealed? Why is it not made common property? Why are the men who possess this knowledge unwilling to let it pass into the general circulation of life for the sake of a better and more successful struggle against deceit, evil, and ignorance? In the first place, this knowledge is not concealed, and in the second place, it cannot from its very nature become common property. We will consider the second of these statements first. I will prove to you afterwards that knowledge is far more accessible to those capable of assimilating it than is usually supposed, and that the whole trouble is that people either do not want it or cannot receive it. Knowledge cannot belong to all, cannot even belong to many. Such is the law. You do not understand this because you do not understand that knowledge, like everything else in the world, is a material. It is material, and this means it possesses all the characteristics of materiality. Even the sand of the desert and the water of the sea is a definite and unchangeable quantity. Knowledge taken in a large quantity in a given place, that is, by one man, let us say, or by a small group of men, it produces very good results. Taken in a small quantity, that is, by everyone of a large number of people, it gives no results at all. From this point of view, it is far more advantageous that knowledge should be preserved among a small number of people and not dispersed among the masses. If knowledge is given to all, nobody will get any. If it is preserved among a few, each will receive not only enough to keep, but to increase what he receives. The fact is that the enormous majority of people do not want any knowledge whatever. They refuse their share of it and do not even take the ration allotted to them in the general distribution. This is particularly evident in times of mass madness, such as wars, revolutions, and so on, when men suddenly seem to lose even the small amount of common sense they had, and turn into complete automatons, giving themselves over to wholesale destruction in vast numbers. In other words, even losing the instinct of self-preservation. Owing to this, enormous quantities of knowledge remain, so to speak, unclaimed, and can be distributed amongst those who realize its value. During periods of mass madness, often coinciding with geological cataclysms, climatic changes and similar phenomena of a planetary character, release a very great quantity of the matter of knowledge. This, in its turn, necessitates the work of collecting this matter of knowledge which would otherwise be lost. During these periods, people do not themselves understand what they are losing. Well, these subjects are very important for the Western world, so I will try to say only what is most important. If people reject even their share of knowledge, it means that there is some deeper problem, which I believe is simply the false self, or the accumulation of the crystallizations of these characters in our head, or those voices in our head, that is splitting our power. One of the critical results of this that is not widely understood is that it results in a loss of sensitivity. When people lose sensitivity, they lose culture and eventually religion, and eventually any sense even of self-preservation. Gurdjieff teaches us something very important: how a society should use and disseminate knowledge. If we look at American culture, where anybody can be anything, this isn't really a culture, but a group of atomized, alienated people who are waiting for their end to come. A traditional society grows from the earth, just like a tree does. It is one people. And at a certain point it becomes illuminated from above, which means that the religion becomes visible. Prior to that, there is an invisible subconscious pull on them. And they have a center that pulls hierarchically along the strata of society, just like a train pulls its carriages up the mountain. Just a small amount of knowledge is transmitted carriage to carriage. A traditional society is very different from the frenetic free world that we live in, and who are dying so quickly they've even made a fashion of having grey hair. In a traditional society, the amount of knowledge each person has is small. Their work is also small, but it is trusted, and it is part of an engine, part of a line pointing towards the star that it follows. And in a traditional society, everybody makes it to the top. I had some thoughts again about what I had said last week about time. It is not that time does not exist, but that what we experience is the universal degeneration of matter. Gurdjieff says that the cosmos is a Trogoautoegocratic process, meaning that it is composed of a series of waterfalls, each subsequent one consuming material from the higher one as it flows down, and that as a three-brained being, for instance, we consume three types of materials: the normal elementary food, the second type of food being air and everything that it contains, and the third type being impressions, which are the psychic phenomena that we receive. These foods, or these materials, come from other processes. The air may come from the processes of this planet itself. What you are looking at is the flowing transformation of material as they flow down the steps of the waterfall, as material is created and then consumed. If a car drives past and it makes a noise, that noise is generated and then it dissipates as it travels out, and it's burning fuel that was created initially by the life of an animal millions of years ago, and the energy that was created by that body distilled into petrol is now burned, another act of consumption. When I look at the horizon, I am seeing a light reflecting off the materials of this planet, and it has been created in the past and it travels towards me and I consume it. You are in fact witnessing the flowing light of the cosmos and its engines of transformation and its processes of transformation. That is what you are looking at, and not sensing the inner magnitude of what is occurring around us. Human beings call this time. Now, if I move on to the Dalai Lama, I had the misfortune of reading one of his new books, Beyond Religion, Ethics for the Modern World. And I was shocked to see on the front page that he reduces Buddhism to having some small practical psychological benefit, and that aside from that it is useless, and that we should put our faith instead in modern science, which is quite shocking and dishonourable. And looking at this photo, you can see what a childish old fool he is. You must remember that the entire Tibetan culture was destroyed under his watch, and I don't think much of the other one either. But it just shows where humanity as a whole is at, and that the crap from these kind of people has very little to do with how their religions and traditions were practiced even not long ago. I was watching a documentary on Rhodesia, and after World War II, as Britain weakened, the British government forced the Rhodesians to give up their country. Step by step in the death of 1,000 cuts, and the Rhodesians felt abandoned by it. There were lots of words, about the rights of others and the international community and the needs of international finance. There's so many things to think about. And over several decades, the British government and the Rhodesians and the UN had many meetings and conversations and debates. And listening to this history, you can't even imagine how is it possible that anybody could wake up in the morning and walk to the post office. And the West is full of questions these days, isn't it? But look at the Muslims who arrive every day, 1,000, just landing on the shores of Britain. They don't have any questions. They just come and do what the hell they want. And the British Empire was strong because God was strong in them. And it integrated them. And they acted with will. When you act with will, it means that the heaven energy is inside of you. And when heaven is inside of you, then the earth submits to you. The goal of the cosmos is to increase heaven. And if God is in you, everything will work out. There are no more questions. There is just will action, breaking against the mechanical entropy of the earth. And the earth will submit, as it is her nature to do when the true man arrives. One other thing about Rhodesia is that there were no Catholic missionaries, there were no NGO guilt trips, and there were no Pfizer vaccine injections for Africa. Rhodesia was not trying to help anybody. Rhodesia was simply a small oak tree that had arrived from the great oak tree of ancient England. It was a living being. Just as the English are a living being. And when an oak tree starts to grow on the land, its arms are wide, and everyone is sheltered underneath it, because it is a living structure. It is not trying to help anybody. It is only life itself. But let's take a little look at Rhodesia today after it's been saved from the oak tree.
The Bulawayo train station, which is one of the biggest stations in southern Africa and in all rights should be a hub of activity, but when visiting it was completely abandoned. In the entrance hall you will find old wooden ticket offices next to the signage pointing out where to get your COVID vaccine, the other side being the abandoned train timetable. The platform is unbelievably British in design and even has traditional painted-on Coca-Cola advertisements. Some carriages that should be used for freight and mail in operation, but when I noticed the passenger carriages in the back, I decided to jump on board, only to notice every single one was in a complete state of abandonment. They had not been stripped, but rather left to decay.
And there's something else. In 1950, the United States went to Korea to fight the Korean War. And they're very famous for charging the Koreans with their bayoneted rifles, impaling the enemy. Well, the interesting thing is that just a few years later in 1957, the same soldiers with the same impaling bayonets were trying to forcefully racially mix the white people in their own country, to force the school kids of white European people to sit in a classroom with people from a completely different part of the octave, something that they really didn't want to do. And the impetus to do this, let's not forget, does not come from other people. It comes from the broken heaven line, which today is represented by the distortions from both the left side and the right side of the political spectrum, both wings having fallen into impurity. So let us hear now from the ever-verdant, truly magnificent Julius Evola, hero and rememberer of the West. I have previously pointed out that the differences between traditional and modern man is not simply a matter of mentality and type of civilization. Rather, the difference concerns the experiential possibilities available to each, and the way in which the world of nature is experienced according to the categories of perception, and the fundamental relationship between I and not I. For traditional man, space, time, and causality had a very different character than they have in the experience of modern man. My main contention is that time in traditional civilizations was not a linear historical time. Time and becoming are related to what is superior to time. In this way, the perception of time undergoes a spiritual transformation. Today, time is perceived as a simple, irreversible order of consecutive events. Its parts are homogeneous and therefore can be measured in a quantitative fashion. Whether an event is past or future, whether it takes place in one or another point in time, does not confer upon it any special quality. It merely makes it a datable event, that's all. There is some kind of reciprocal indifference between time and its contents. The traditional experience of time was of a very different kind. Time was not regarded quantitatively, but rather qualitatively. Not as a series, but as a rhythm. It did not flow uniformly and indefinitely, but was broken down into cycles and periods in which every moment had its own meaning and specific value in relation to all the others, as well as a lively individuality and functionality. Each of these cycles or periods, the Chaldean and Hellenic Great Year, the Etruscan or Latin Seculum, the Iranian Aeon, the Aztec Suns, the Hindu Kalpas. They followed each other as a series of eternities. Since this wholeness was not quantitatively, but organic, then the chronological durations of the Seculum were ephemeral. Quantitatively, different periods of time were regarded as equal, and so certain numbers such as 7, 9, 12, and 1000 were traditionally employed not to express quantity but rather typical structures of rhythm. Thus they had different durations, but they remained symbolically equivalent. Accordingly, instead of an indefinite chronological sequence, the traditional world knew a hierarchy based on analogical correspondences between great and small cycles. The result was a sort of reduction of the temporal manifold to the supertemporal unity. Since the small cycle reproduced analogically the great cycle, this created the possibility of participation in ever greater orders and in durations increasingly free from all residues of matter or contingency, until what was reached was some kind of space-time continuum. By ordering time from above, so that every duration was divided into several cyclical periods reflecting such a structure, and by associating to specific moments of these cycles the celebrations, rituals, or festivities that were destined to reawaken or to reveal the corresponding meanings, the traditional world actively promoted a liberation and a transfiguration. It arrested the confused flow of the waters, and created in them a transparency in the current of becoming, thus revealing immobile metaphysical depths. The calendar that measured time in ancient times had a sacred character, and it was entrusted to the wisdom of the priestly castes, and the hours of the day, the days of the week, and given days of the year were considered sacred to certain deities or associated with specific destinies. Even in the Catholic residues, a liturgical year is spangled with religious festivities and with days marked for sacred events. The fact that stars, stellar periods, and given points in the course of the sun were traditionally utilized to determine the units of rhythm hardly lends support to the so-called naturalistic interpretations of time. In fact, the traditional world never deified the natural or heavenly elements, but on the contrary, these elements were thought fit to convey divine forces in an analogical fashion. There is in the heaven a great multitude of gods who have been recognized as such by those who survey the heavens not casually, not like cattle. The two arches of the ascent and the descent of the solar light during the year appear to be the most apt to express the sacrificial meaning of death and rebirth, as well as the cycles constituted by the dark descending path and by the bright ascending path. Considering that the constellations of the zodiac, which were articulations of the god year, were used to identify the moments of the sun's position in the sky, the number 12 is repeatedly found as one of the most apt rhythms to express anything that may have the meaning of solar fulfillment. The dates corresponding to stellar positions in the sky, such as the solstice, which were apt to express higher meanings in terms of a cosmic symbolism, are preserved almost identically in the various forms assumed by traditions and passed on from one people to another. Through a comparative study, it is possible and very easy to point out the correspondence and the uniformity of feasts and fundamental calendar rhythms through which the sacred was introduced into the fabric of time, thus breaking its duration into many cyclical images of an eternal history that various natural phenomena contributed to recall and to mark the rhythm. And it is in the same order of ideas that we must look for the true meaning of the legends concerning characters who became invisible, who never died, or who are destined to be reawakened or to manifest themselves at the end of a given time, such as Alexander the Great, King Arthur, Frederick, King Sebastian. The latter are all different incarnations of the same theme, transferred from reality into super-reality. And if traditional man had an experience of time essentially different from that of modern man, it follows that analogous considerations must be made concerning the experience of space. Space is considered today only as the simple container of bodies and of motions, totally indifferent to both. But in the experience of traditional man, on the contrary, and even in residues at times present among some savage populations, space is alive and saturated with all kinds of qualities and intensity. The traditional idea of space is a mystical, all-pervasive substance energy, more material than immaterial, more psychic than physical, often conceived as light, and distributed according to its various saturations in various regions. Thus, each of these regions seems to possess its own virtues, and to participate essentially in the powers that reside in it, so as to make every place a fatidic space endowed with its own intensity and occult individuality. In the well-known expression of Epimenides of Knossos, "In him we live and move and have our being." Well, I think I'll leave it there, otherwise I'll be reading until 3 in the morning. I feel charged with everything he says. It appears that we're not dead yet. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed it this week, and you take care. Goodbye.